As you can see on your screens, the breaking news, South Africa's COVID-19 numbers have gone up from just over 15,000 yesterday to about 21,099 today, with 99 new deaths. Looking at the numbers individually, provincially, KZN coming in at 5,411. They are leading at the moment, followed by the Western Cape with 4,609, and then Gauteng at 3,807. Now, while COVID-19 infections are climbing in coastal regions, Gauteng's infections, as you heard, seem to be dropping. But could this be because people have returned to their hometowns, or because Gauteng has reached its peak? To answer that question for us, we're joined by Professor Guy Richards from Wits University. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. I believe you're in Cape Town for us. Thanks for joining us here on SA tonight. Now, are we correct in, saying that people have gone home in Gauteng and that's why we're seeing such a decrease in numbers, or are we being unfair on the province?
No, I think that if you remember the third wave, in fact, Gauteng preceded all the other provinces by a good period of time. And in fact, we had that funny shaped curve, an initial increase, and then we had the two bumps thereafter. And the two bumps were actually representative of Western Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. So I think that we have peaked certainly in Gauteng, and we've had this very sharp upward movement, and then seemed to have had a shorter overall duration of the infection. And that almost certainly is related to a factor that you heard shortly before, that many people, up to 80% of people in South Africa, have antibodies, either because of vaccine or because they've actually had the virus beforehand. So that is ameliorating the severity of the illness. And that means also that if you have an asymptomatic infection, you don't go and get tested. So there are going to be less people being tested, and often you'll get an underrepresentation of the numbers. But nonetheless, it does appear that the overall numbers are decreasing.
Now, looking at the fact that Gauteng, as you're saying, it looks like we've reached our peak, right? So our numbers are going a bit low, and now the new epicenter in South Africa is KZN, followed by the Western Cape. What can we attribute these numbers to in terms of these two provinces suddenly picking up? We know that this is usually the trend. KZN or the Western Cape will take over from Gauteng, but why is it never the other provinces?
Well, in fact, it was originally, if you remember, originally Western Cape, in the first wave and the second wave, Western Cape preceded Gauteng. But now we actually are at a situation for the last two waves where Gauteng was the initial epicenter, and then it spread from there to the other places. Now, one of the reasons for the spread, of course, is the fact that people have traveled to KZN or to the Western Cape, etc. Not that one should say you shouldn't travel, because whatever you do, there is going to be transmission to the other provinces at some point. And the disease, or this variant, is so transmissible that it's going to spread no matter what you do. And we're going to be seeing for some time quite a lot of cases in the community. The nice thing about it is that so far we still have a disconnect between deaths and between the number of cases. People always report the number of cases and say, goodness me, look at those, isn't that terrible? And yes, it is, but we should really be looking at the number of people hospitalized, and even more important, we should be looking at the number of people in ICU and the number of people on mechanical ventilation, because those are the ones that are going to do badly. And in general, those ones are the ones that are not vaccinated and do not have any form of immunity.
Now, Prof, looking at all the other provinces, am I correct in asking you, what is Limpopo doing right, for instance, with 811 cases? Or is it because people there, because of how vast the rural land is in a province like Limpopo, maybe they're not testing as much as we are in Gauteng or Cape Town or KZN?
I'm sure that's one factor, but do remember that the actual population density in an area like Gauteng is so much greater than Limpopo that you're much more likely to spread over a rapid period of time in a setting like Johannesburg, where people are living in close proximity and are indulging in communal activities to a much larger extent.
I chose a province like Limpopo, Prof, because I expected that their numbers would possibly be a little bit more. Not that, of course, we all want COVID-19 to leave us alone by now, but I chose a province like Limpopo because it's a province that actually it leads to areas not only Limpopo itself, but also your Zimbabwe. They pass through Limpopo, for instance. So that's why I was asking about that province in particular, and also because I've got so many friends who are here in Gauteng for employment purposes and actually reside in Limpopo. So that's why I'm asking about that province in particular.
Yeah, well, I think that that's quite right. But part of the reason why Gauteng is so populated is because so many people actually do come looking for work in Gauteng. And therefore, there are far fewer people together, and therefore there's going to be less transmission. And I agree with you in your earlier statement that because many, many people are living in a rural environment and they get sick or mildly sick, they don't bother to test. And therefore, many cases are either asymptomatic or are unrecognized when they actually are symptomatic. So I think that that's always going to be the case in communities where there is a higher percentage of rural dwelling rather than in the big cities where we all live and crowd together.
All right, thank you so much for your time here on eNCA. That was Professor Guy Richards from Wits University.